How are you, Daniel?
Doing well. Had a exciting weekend of kid activities, mostly, I guess. But you know, what did you do this weekend? Did you
I mean,
think
I watched
wasn't
the
there
Super Bowl.
like a senior thing that took place on Saturday night at the
There
public library?
was, there was, there was. We had the Project Graduation 2025 party. Kim, chaired that because she can't get enough philanthropic, charitable type of, positions. So they raised a lot of money. It was really fun. We missed you there. You could have come, even though you only have one in 26.
No one
Um,
invited me, or maybe they purposely didn't invite me to the fun
well,
event.
it started before the end of Shabbat, so I was trying to be, courteous.
Yeah, because I'm really Shomer Shabbat. I
Well,
keep
you
that
could be.
Sabbath.
You never know. How did you enjoy the Super Bowl?
I did, except, and I know this is going to raise a lot of eyebrows. I'm going to get a lot of comments, but I wasn't a big fan of Kendrick Lamar being the headliner of the Super Bowl. Just doesn't match up with other headliners. Just my personal opinion.
I'm not going to give my opinion on this podcast because I don't want people to like glare at me when I'm at the J, but I have a lot of opinions, probably none which are very popular in the progressive crowd here in Austin. So I'm going to keep those to myself that's okay.
I think Serena Williams cameo though, like capped it off. With all the, I just like, is that Serena Williams? And then it was, and then of course my children had to tell me the backstory of why she was there.
Oh, well, to be clear, after I watched it, then I went and Googled what did I just watch? So somebody could explain to me all the backstory and innuendo and the Drake stuff. And I was like, you know what? I really, there's a lot of stuff I care about, and this is just not on the list of stuff I care about.
Yeah, in all seriousness, I was happy for Philadelphia. Not that I'm a fan of either team, but Jalen Hurts, I feel like deserves something. He's really worked his butt off to get to this point, and he was kind of cast. People are like, "Oh, he's never going to make it in the NFL," and lo and behold, he's Super Bowl champion, MVP, you name it. He's got
I,
all
I,
of it
I was
now.
very happy with the outcome. I'll leave it at that. We should probably get to the episode now. So, people are tuning in not for our, they don't really care about what we thought about the Super Bowl or
No, they
Kendrick Lamar for
don't.
that matter.
No,
All
they
right. Well,
don't. Although
welcome
there,
back to
there
the Rabbi
was
and the Other Guy. As usual, the other guy, Matt Schocket here, my good friend and Titan of Torah, Daniel A. Septimus, who we are recording at night. So I'm a little bit worried about your peppiness today. So I hope you drank some coffee or something before the episode.
I get my second wind at night.
Oh, you do? All right. That's
Yes,
good. It's just the
I do.
afternoon podcast I have to worry about.
It's the afternoons. Yeah, that's when I need my siesta. I need that time just to kind of take a nap and
Is,
then rejuvenate.
is that part of your rabbinical training? Do you all take like a little afternoon siesta?
Absolutely. It's like being in the preschool classrooms.
Makes sense. All right, let's bring our guest in. We are lucky enough to be joined by Zack Bodner, an accomplished author. I actually have read your book. I reread a little bit of it this afternoon, just in preparation. He's a speaker, storyteller, and a visionary Jewish leader and professional. His book, Why Do Jewish, available on Amazon and at your local retailer, is a manifesto for 21st century Jewish peoplehood, and it's an Amazon #1 new release in Jewish life and religion and philosophy. Spent 14 years as the Pacific Northwest Regional Director of APAC, and has since been the president and CEO of the Oshman Family JCC in Palo Alto, where he founded an annual conference called Zionism 3.0, which has now evolved to become the Z3 Project, a global effort to reimagine diaspora-Israel relations. Most importantly, he's a proud husband and a father of 3 children. Boys or girls?
A little bit of both. 2 girls and a boy. So thanks for having me, Matt. Good to be here. Daniel, great to also spend time with you in this way. I can't wait to be in Austin, seeing you live and in person.
We look forward to it. It's your third time coming, isn't it?
Yeah, it is indeed. And every time I come, you guys just make me feel more and more welcome. So thank you, especially the other guy, Matt. I'm talking about right now, Matt. No, I'm just kidding. It's
That makes total sense.
I appreciate getting the late kind of early evening second wind. I'm also an afternoon kind of mellow guy. Need my shot of espresso in the afternoon. I'm not sure I'd go and take naps in the preschool there, Daniel. But hey, I'm also this. It's rough at this age, I guess.
just for clarity, I didn't say I was taking naps in the preschool. I just want to take naps like a preschooler. Just it wouldn't be appropriate in the preschool.
Got it.
Would be semi-creepy.
It would
For
be.
sure.
It would be.
All right. Well, Zach, we're really excited to have you. I did read your book. I reread a couple of chapters
Thank you.
today that I'd highlighted in advance of what we're going to talk about today. I appreciate the story about your childhood and growing up and how you were shaped. And so let's get right to it. What is Zionism 3.0? Or just you can start reading chapter 6 if you want.
Exactly. First of all, thank you again, Matt. I appreciate you inviting me on, reading the book. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Look, Zionism 3.0 is shorthand for us being in the third era of Zionism, recognizing that this is a unique moment in Jewish history. In fact, in all of our multi-thousands of years of being around, there's never, ever, ever existed before both a strong Jewish diaspora and a strong Jewish homeland. This is the first time in the history of the Jewish people where there's both a strong Jewish homeland, a strong Jewish diaspora. Yes, we have our challenges. Of course, we know what's going on, especially post-October 7th, but we still have this moment where we have to figure out how do we relate to one another, because Zionism 1.0 is kind of the pre-1948 Zionism of Theodor Herzl, the founders of the state. It was as we were figuring out what it meant to find our own, build our own, win over our own new modern state of Israel, which was going to be the new homeland for the Jewish people, our escape from the horrible anti-Semitism around the world. Zionism 2.0 was basically 1948 till roughly 2000, the turn of the century. I'm not putting a hard and fast rule there, Matt, but ultimately it was this period of time when the rest of the world's Jews came together and said, we have to make this a success. Many made Aliyah. Those who didn't have the chutzpah to make Aliyah, we stayed in the diaspora. And the rule was, you support Israel. You don't get to have a say in what happens over there, but support Israel with your political support, your financial support. It was kind of the notion of the rich American uncle, if you remember. And ultimately, it was what I would call the era of diaspora negation. Right. In fact, the notion of making Aliyah, moving to Israel, was going up, and you were called a Yored, going down, if you left Israel to go back to the diaspora. So that Zionism 2.0 era, Matt, was about diaspora negation. Now we're in this period where there's both a strong Jewish diaspora, strong Jewish homeland. How do we engage with each other? How do we get along in a way that it's not just all about the contentiousness of the areas where we disagree? We must build a new relationship where it's much more about how we can consult with each other and engage with each other from having a stake and potentially a say at the same time.
So tell me, what do you see as the biggest areas of contention between the Israeli Jews and the American Jewry?
Well, up until October 7th, and perhaps even again today, because that is unfortunately too far in the rearview mirror of too many diaspora Jews, at least, definitely not Israelis. I would say that the two main areas of contention were around religion and politics, right? The folks who were not Orthodox, who are not Orthodox, took issue with the way that the chief rabbinate would run the state of Israel. If you're not an Orthodox Jew, if you, for example, are a Reform Jew and wanted to have Reform rituals in Israel, it wouldn't always jive with the way the chief rabbinate wanted to run the religiosity of the country. If you were converted by a rabbi that wasn't an Orthodox rabbi, that wouldn't always jive with the way the chief rabbinate interpreted the rules of Judaism. So on issues of religiosity, diaspora Jews and Israeli Jews would bump into each other, would scratch up against each other. And also the issue of politics, specifically when it came to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Leading up into October 7th, it was around issues of judicial reform. But many American Jews were not approving of the way, for example, the settlements, the way Bibi would run things, the way Ben Gvir and Smotrich would enter the government. The majority of American Jews are liberal, Matt, as you know. And so there was some scratchiness there as well. Meanwhile, Israelis would look at us and they'd say, you're not even going to be Jewish in a generation, intermarriage, assimilation, anti-Semitism. So they were also talking past us. So diaspora Jewry, Israeli Jewry, we were kind of focusing on the areas of friction. But October 7th brought us together. There was this moment where we all realized, whoa, I guess anti-Semitism is not a thing of the past. I guess the world still does hate Jews. And there was this moment of what's sociologically been called the surge, where a lot of Jews came out of the woodwork to say, I care and I want to help and I want to get involved. Unfortunately, what I'm seeing right now is that a lot of the surge is fading because of a host of reasons. But the latest example I'll give is that over the course of this past weekend, when we saw the release of 3 more hostages, and they came out of the dungeons just looking like Holocaust survivors. I mean, that was what President Trump himself said. It shocked us all. And they told the stories of the hostages who were still being held in chains and what it was like. And Israelis felt this visceral reaction. And it scratched open once again the wound. And Israelis are living in this moment of trauma. They are still feeling the pain of knowing people who were impacted directly by October 7th, of having children serving in the military. Unfortunately, a lot of American Jews who don't have connections to Israel or Israelis don't feel it as acutely. And so for them, a lot of them, and this is sacrilegious, they don't want to say it out loud, there's a lot of shame associated with it, but a lot of them feel like, can't we get back to some level of normalcy? And they were focusing on other events of the weekend when Israeli Jews were consumed by the hostage release. And it's one more example, Matt, of how there's division and fissures in the relationship between Diaspora Jewry and Israel, I'm seeing once again.
Okay, and then from that, you create this project, right? What's now the Z3 project, but it was originally a conference at the Palo Alto JCC, right? And so tell
Correct.
me about the mindset that went into saying, hey, I've got this idea to bring these people together to create dialogue.
Right. So,
because it's really visionary, like what you did back then. People weren't doing this.
Well, thank you. At the time, I, as you mentioned in my bio, I come from working at APAC for almost 15 years, and I left in around the height of the Obama-Iran nuclear deal, Balagan conflict. And I came to the JCC, and I was definitely one of these guys who felt that the Iran deal was a bad deal for Israel, bad deal for America. So I started having all these speakers come who would talk about why the Iran deal was a bad thing. And I had a board member who came to me, and he was a mensch. He came to me quietly. He came to me privately. He didn't do it publicly in a board meeting or put my back against a wall. And he basically came to me and said, hey, are you going to have somebody come talk about why the Iran deal might be a good thing? I was like, what, are you crazy? Why would I give oxygen to that point of view, right? Like, and he, again, it was a mensch, man. He's like, look, you just may want to consider, you're trying to make the JCC the living room, the town square for the entire Jewish people. There's a lot of people, especially out here in liberal Northern California, that feel differently. You may want to consider this. And I really did some soul searching. I had to think about how we would do this the right way. I didn't want to sacrifice my integrity. We ended up having an event where we had 2 people against the deal, 2 people in favor of the deal, and a local radio announcer played the intermediary, and we had 800 people show up. Matt, we have an amphitheater that fills with 400 people. 800 people showed up, and I was blown away. We had to have overflow space in other rooms, and then we actually had a conversation, and people were engaged. And I saw that we could bring people on different sides of the issue together. And I said, okay, if I could do this for the Iran deal, I could do this for Israeli-Palestinian conflict stuff. I could do this for left, right, secular, Orthodox. So we decided to host our first Zionism 3.0 conference. And that was 10 years ago. And I was bringing together the folks on the far left and the far right, Orthodox seculars. I said, and Israelis and Americans. Before this was done, before Fault Lines, which was an old podcast with Danny Gordis and Peter Beiner, before that even existed, we were the first ones to bring these folks together in the room, and we made it work. And we said, okay, we need to be modeling this for folks in our community at least. We didn't know it was going to take off across the country. And Daniel and the folks in Austin said, hey, help us. Because I realized in other communities too, the issue of Israel was toxic. Right? I served on the board of directors of a local synagogue where they wouldn't even bring in a speaker to talk about Israel, because if it was too left-wing, the right-wing donor would leave. If it was too right-wing, the lefties would protest out front. They brought in a speaker to talk about why Brit Milah was a bad thing, and we shouldn't be giving our young 8-day-old boys a circumcision. But that wasn't controversial, but Israel was controversial. So I said, Matt, we gotta, again, this is the Bay Area, of course, but I said we have to be able to have the conversation about Israel, even if it's tough. So it started as a conference that became an annual conference. And then 5 years in, we transitioned it. I hired an incredible guy, Rabbi Amitai Freeman, who helped us think through how to evolve this to become the Z3 project, which I'm happy to share more about as we dive deeper. But that's where it started. And I had friends like Daniel who came in and participated and said, let's figure out how to take this show on the road. And you guys in Austin were the first ones to do a Z3 in another town. And last year it was a success, and we're doing it again this year.
We're excited. So Zach, is there a tent of who you will allow to come to the conference? Like, Are there boundaries to the tent? What does that look like for you from the left and the right and the secular and the Orthodox? Like, you mentioned all those things, but are there boundaries to that?
Yeah, of course they are. I always talk about how we're a big tent, but to have a tent, you have to have tent poles. Otherwise, it's just a tarp laying on the ground, right? And determining where those tent poles are is going to be different in each city. What works in Austin, it's probably not going to work in Dallas. It's probably not going to work in Miami. Probably not going to work in Chicago. Probably not going to work in LA. So each community has to figure out what works for them, where the tent poles are. I would say the overall arching rule is that this is a Zionist enterprise. This is a Zionist endeavor. So it starts with, you have to be a Zionist to be a part of this project, right? You have to believe that Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish and democratic state. That's what we mean by Zionism. All that other stuff, as you know, that people throw on there to make Zionism a dirty word these days, not okay. So it starts there. This is a conference and a conversation, a dialogue for Zionists. We're not looking at bringing in those folks who are anti-Zionists who just want to throw fuel on the fire. And then you have to ask, okay, within that big tent, Daniel, who's in, who's out? Now, I will confess to you that for a decade, I have had a disagreement, a debate with some friends in the community who've said that it'd be better off to not define the boundaries, to not put up the tent poles, to just say what you do represent, and folks will self-select out. And I was always the one that said, no, we need to say who's in and who's out, you know? And I think now in this post-October 7th moment, it's enough to just say, this is a Zionist thing, and the non-Zionists and anti-Zionists are not going to walk in the tent. Now, here's what I will say, though. I do believe there are some young people in our community, there are some progressive people in our community who are unwilling to call themselves Zionists because they're confused by the nomenclature, because our enemies have lumped a lot of baggage onto that. And those are the folks I would invite in, Daniel. I'd say, look, let's have a conversation, because I want you to feel good about being a Zionist. Being a Zionist means that you stand with Israel, but it doesn't mean you're an anti-Palestinian, right? So the folks who are unwilling to call themselves Zionists at this point out of ignorance, I'd bring them in and I'd make them a part of the conversation. The ones who are definitely anti-Zionist, don't believe Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state, okay, they're not in the tent, Daniel. So the hard left and the hard right are just, I think, folks who would not feel comfortable in this conversation, and we wouldn't want them there.
Well, I was going to ask, what's an example of a hard right perspective that you think is, outside the tent?
Well, folks who again, if we're embracing this notion that we believe Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish and democratic state, then you have to ask yourself, okay, those folks who think that Israel should be a Jewish state but not democratic, maybe they're too far right. And those folks who think that Israel should be democratic but not Jewish, maybe they're too far left. So that's kind of the language we would use, but there's a nuance there that we would have to engage in individual conversation with each of the folks who come. Now, by the way, anybody could come and be a part of the community assembly. Anybody could be a part of the audience, and as long as they behave themselves, okay. It's the people who get a platform, right? That get the podium, who get the microphone. Those are the ones I'm not going to invite if they're outside of that tent, Daniel. But everyone should be able to be in the audience if they're willing to behave themselves and listen. The problem we're seeing, like on college campuses, when we have Zionists who are canceled, who are shouted down, right? We don't want to create that environment. We want people to be open-minded and listen and have a conversation.
So I'm going to take the conversation back just a second, because we talk about Zionists as if we all understand exactly what the definition of Zionist is. And I believe that is something that especially more recently has been challenged, is what exactly is Zionism versus anti-Zionism versus being pro-Jewish. And so I'm wondering, Zach, if you would define, at least for you, what Zionism is and what it isn't.
Yeah. So Zionism, for me, very simply, is the right for this Jewish people through self-determination to have a Jewish and democratic home in our homeland. That's it. That's all of it. So again, you don't have to be Jewish to be a Zionist. And just as I believe, the Chinese deserve a home in China, the French in France, the Germans, the Brits, the Jews deserve a homeland in the state of Israel. Okay. I would even say the Palestinians deserve a state. Now, that doesn't say where the border should be, whether settlers should be in or out. Like, all that's not part of the definition, Matt. But being a Zionist is, in my mind, someone who believes that Jews have a right to self-determination, living in the land of Israel, in the state of Israel, in a Jewish and democratic state. That's what it means. An anti-Zionist does not believe Jews should have a state of their own.
Okay, so my follow-up question, and this is a question I get asked all the time. If Zionism is simply the right of self-determination for the Jewish people, right? In general, self-determination for an ethnic group is considered to be a liberal ideal, right? So how is it that the progressive movement has become anti-Zionist in many ways?
Well, there's a lot of answers to that question. I think that and I'm going to say that's the hard progressives, right? It's the far progressives that
Yeah, not
have
certainly not
become
all progressives,
anti-Zionist.
but there is a
Right.
segment of that progressive movement that has become, fiercely anti-Jewish, fiercely anti-Zionist. Not all of them, certainly, but there's
Right.
a segment of them. And so how does that happen? If a liberal idea, because I look at these progressive movements, right? And I look at, I mean, pick one, it doesn't matter. BLM, right? The right, that Black Lives Matter, that we need to be, for ourselves, or LGBTQ rights, right? A group of people who deserves to be able to define what they are and define what their rights are. So how does that then, you would think that that would apply to Jewish sovereignty, not be anti-Jewish sovereignty. So how does that happen?
A couple of ways. First of all, I believe that the story has been co-opted. I believe that if you see that everything today has been put into this lens of the colonialist, anti-colonialist struggle, then what it looks like, our enemies have painted this as a picture of white colonialist Europeans having come in and pushed out the indigenous people of color. And if you buy into that narrative and you're a person of color, you're a part of the BIPOC community, which is, where some in the progressive community are, then you're going to say, well, the Jews don't deserve to be there. The Jews have thrown out the indigenous Muslim population, Arab population, Palestinian population. So you're going to just buy into that part of your Weltanschauung, your worldview. So that's one of the reasons why a segment of that community, I believe, has rejected the Jewish right for self-determination. There's a lack of acceptance that the Jews were the original indigenous people to the land of Israel. We know this. If you actually know your Bible, you go back. The Jews were the original indigenous people of the land of Israel. In fact, there would be no Judaism, Jewish people, Jewish religion, but for the land of Israel. Okay, so by separating out, by divorcing Jewish from Israel, you're allowing people to even be Jewish anti-Zionists, which in my mind is a total oxymoron, because I believe anti-Zionism is a form of anti-Semitism. But that's one of the ways that some people become anti-Zionist, Matt, when they buy into a progressive worldview. They think that the white European colonialists have come in and they've kicked out the indigenous people of color. The other way that some people have come to this conclusion is, like you said, they don't know that the Jews are more than just an ethnicity, more than just a religion, more than just a nationality, right? As I say in my book, I open the book with this kind of multiple choice question: what is Jewish? Is it a religion? Is it a nationality? Is it an ethnicity? Is it a moral code? Is it a culture? And as you guys know, the right answer is it's all of the above. As Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan of blessed memory said, it's a civilization. We're more than that. So people who try to put Judaism in a box of it's just an ethnicity, or it's just a nationality, or it's just a religion, they will say, well, there shouldn't be states that are just for a single religion either. And even though we know Israel is open to people of all religions, and 20% of Israelis are not Jewish, and they're allowed to serve in the Knesset and they serve in the Supreme Court, somehow they conveniently forget these facts. Somehow they conveniently think that only the Jews don't deserve a state of their own, even though this is the one place in the Middle East that honors women's rights and gay rights and minority rights and freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom of the press. None of that matters, Matt. They have somehow rationalized to themselves that the Jews are the only ones in the world that don't. And by the way, this is not a rarity. There's only one country in the entire world that is not allowed to sit on the UN Security Council. Only one country. and that's Israel. So I would argue that a lot of this boils down to deep-seated anti-Semitism, Matt. I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but
No,
I think at the
I
end of the
agree
day,
with you that they come up. Anti-Semitism is the oldest hate in the world, right? This is just the newest rationale for it in a lot of ways. And I
that's right.
agree with you. You know, it is a lot of people when they think of Jews think of Ashkenazi Jews, right? And you point out really nicely in your book that the irony of this is that Israel is more diverse than many countries of the world. There's Israelis from all over, including, you know, the Ethiopian Jews who are now becoming a very, very large part of it, right? And so it's not white European settlers, although that's admittedly, especially in America, that's what most, you know, there's a lot of Ashkenazi Jews here, right? You know, they
That's right.
came over as shopkeepers in the 1890s and, you know, set up Neiman Marcus and the rest is history.
Right.
But, you know,
In fact, a lot of Israelis today, Matt, don't even understand this diaspora Jewish term of Jews of color, because 65% of Israelis are quote unquote Jews of color. They're Mizrahi Jews, they're Sephardi Jews, they're Jews from Middle Eastern countries. And so they don't even understand the terminology. But that's not what our enemies would have you believe when they paint this picture, as you said, of the white Europeans who've come in to displace someone else. I had to go and marry a nice Sephardic girl to kind of mix up the gene pool, man. I'm an Ashkenazi guy. I married into a family where my wife's father is from Saloniki. He was born in 1938 Palestine, and he was from the original kind of intermarried family where he, a Sephardic family, you know, Irgunik, followers of Menachem Begin, married into a nice Haganah family. My my mother-in-law's family from Czech and Germany, and they supported Ben Gurion, and that was the original like intermarriage. But yeah, it's definitely a whole new narrative that we're raising our kids in today.
the diversity of the food at your Seder must be wonderful then.
It's wonderful, and I will tell you, definitely try Sephardi charoset if you hadn't. It's much better than Ashkenazi charoset.
I think Sephardic food in general is much better than Ashkenazi food. I'm willing to go to war on that conversation. But I mean,
By the way,
first of
nobody
all,
argues with that. There's not a person in the world that argues with that. Have you been to Spain
well,
and Portugal?
it's like when the comedian Modi gets up and talks about the difference between the joy in Ashkenazi Judaism versus Sephardic Judaism. It's pretty
Right.
true. I mean, it's hard to debate it.
Oh, they're on
Right.
TikTok now. My daughter has shown them to me. She's like, Dad, check
Yes.
out this TikTok. I'm like, that's an old joke from like, you know, 100 years ago that they're now making TikToks about.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So Zach, how would you, 10 years later, it's amazing. It's been 10 years, by the way. How do you feel about the progress you're making toward this goal of bringing these two communities together, bringing the left and the right together? And how do you measure that progress? How do you evaluate that progress? Talk to us. Like, how are we doing on that?
It's a great question. So first of all, I'm feeling good about the progress in many ways because there are a lot more communities that are being turned on to this and asking for our help in this. So what we've done is we've taken this from a once a year conference that we now have events that are happening year round. We have other conferences happening around the country, like is happening later this month in Austin. We have one happening in Miami. We're planning one in Philadelphia. But what I've seen, and you were a part of this, Daniel, is that our colleagues around the country, not just folks who run JCCs, but folks who run day camps, folks who run federations, folks who run other Jewish organizations like AJC, they came to us and they said, help us figure out how to have these conversations back home. So we launched what we call the Z3 Leadership Lab, where people would come to the conference and they'd spend the next 2 days in a crash course of how to bring this to their own community in whatever way looks right for them. Sometimes it's a conference, sometimes it's a book festival, sometimes it's a whatever. And so we've now trained over the last 5 years, nearly 200 leaders in the Jewish community from around the world, Israelis, Americans, also Europeans through this Hakel program are coming over and they're bringing it back to their communities. So the Z3 Leadership Lab is helping amplify this notion of Z3. So that's one way of us measuring our success. But it also has led to people saying, hey, how do we talk about the future of Zionism? What's this language that we can use? So just this past year, we launched the Z3 Institute, which is the think tank arm. We published our first book called Young Zionist Voices, which has 31 young people, a lot of them college students, all under the age of 30, who are talking about what Zionism means for them. talking about what the future of Zionism could look like. And through the Z3 Institute, where we're going to have Z3 fellows, we have a handful that are already like as the thinkers, the big thinkers of the Z3 Institute. The notion is that we have this think tank paired with a do tank of a JCC. You know, if you think about like a medical school needing a teaching hospital, we're not a think tank like in Washington, D.C. to set up U.S. policy, but we're a think tank that's trying to change the way people in communities think about doing Jewish, think about connecting to Israel, thinking about becoming Zionists today. So we're going to have these books published, and they're going to get turned into what I call deployable playbooks, where families in preschools, families in camps, teenagers can figure out how to make this a reality in their own lives. So one of the ways we're measuring success, Daniel, is that more and more people are asking for this. More and more people are coming to us saying, train us on how to do this so that Israel doesn't become a divisive issue. But the other way that we're gauging whether we're successful or not is in this moment where the Jewish people are under siege. I believe there's a global jihad against the Jewish people post October 7th. Is that you're seeing folks revert back to a Z2 mentality. Okay, they're reverting back. So a lot of people say, "Oh, do you think that we're ready for Z4, Zionism 4.0?" I said, no. We're still in this moment where we need to build a new way of engaging diaspora and Israeli Jewry. How do we not fall back into our old patterns? Because what's happening is Israeli Jews are once again saying, "You American Jews, you don't know what we experienced. So shut up. You don't get a say. Just support us with whatever we have to do." And a lot of American Jews are saying, well, what you're doing in Gaza is going a little too far, and maybe you don't have to be so hard on the Palestinians, right? Like you're starting to see, once again, falling back into this relationship built on criticism. And I'll just point out, Daniel, Matt, if you think of any relationship that you two have in your lives, let's take the two of you. You banter, you have fun, you disagree as part of your the way you get along. But if you really only focused on the true areas of disagreement, the things that you really got upset with each other, the main friction, your relationship's not going to last. It's not going to last past the next few episodes of your awesome podcast. But instead, there's areas of agreement, there's areas of respect, there's areas of empathy, and within that, you have real disagreement. So why should Diaspora Jewry and Israeli Jewry only focus our relationship on the areas of disagreement? That's Zionism 2.0. We have to go back to building Zionism 3.0. And the fact that I'm seeing so many more communities ask for help with this, Daniel, is what leads me to believe that we're having success.
But where are the Israelis on that question? Because, right, it has to be, you can't solve this on just in the diaspora, right? Like, I mean, Elliot Cosgrove's got a great new book out. We're hoping to have him on the podcast at some point. And he talks about this as a central issue in his book, right? It's not lost on everybody, and we open the podcast with this, right? This is the first time ever in 3,000 years of Jewish 3,000. That's right, Daniel.
I mean, if you want to go back, yes, 3,000.
Close enough. 3,000 years of Jewish history, right? We were either in Israel or we were not in Israel,
right?
And now we have 80 years, 75, 80-ish of being in both, right?
That's right.
But I would argue that, through a lot of that, Israel was a weaker country, right? Supported by America, a very strong country. And now we have Israel, it's not a weak country, right?
Right.
And it's not lost on me. This is kind of counterintuitive, but I'd like to hear your opinion. When October 7th happened, Israel appears weak. And the outpouring of American Jews, left, right, center, progressive, hardliner, all came out for Israel. I think, Dan, you can tell me how much money we raised. A tremendous amount of money raised for Israel. Everybody, the surge, right?
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, Israel wins, and wins kind of dominantly, militarily, at least, right? And all of a sudden, Americans are like, oh, Israel's strong again. Now we can, desurge or whatever you want to call it. And I would be curious to hear your opinion as to whether that's what you're seeing.
Okay. So let's unpack that a bit, because I think on the one hand, you're absolutely correct. American Jews came out after October 7th and did what we do well. We raised money. We raised about $800 million through Jewish federations in North America, right, Daniel?
Over 800 million.
Over 800 million, nearly $1 billion, because that's what we do well. We raise money. And what did the Israelis do after October 7th, Matt? They started filling 747s with flak jackets and camelbacks and boots because they heard from Israelis on the ground, what do we need? We need actual supplies. So the Israelis started doing something very different with their philanthropy. Meanwhile, a lot of the planes with this filled with incredible equipment got stuck in customs. A lot of the equipment was the wrong equipment. I heard stories of kibbutzniks getting a bunch of white sneakers. They're like, what are we going to do with white sneakers? I heard stories of IDF soldiers getting a plane load of black flak jackets going, we can't use black. That's what Hamas wears. We have to use the green ones, right? So Israelis had the right thing in mind, but they didn't know how to go through the avenues that the Americans did. Meanwhile, the Americans were raising a ton of money, but it's taken JF&A more than a year and a half, and there's still half of that money in the bank. They haven't figured out how to spend the money on the ground. So my notion, Matt, is to take the best of Israeli ingenuity, Israeli chutzpah, and the best of American philanthropy and diplomatic know-how and mesh the two to be more efficient and more effective together. That's what I think
What's
we need to do.
interesting, Daniel and I were in Israel, October 27th, 2023, right? So the war is 20 days old. And we asked specifically, what do you need? Right? Because that was hey, what do you need? And you know what they told us? They need money.
Yeah.
Because they could buy what they needed. The supply chain wasn't the problem. They needed money.
Yeah,
so neither one got it right.
And not only that, by the time we got there, and it's incredible, like 2 weeks later, 2.5 weeks later, they had already started to correct the supply chain stuff, like how they did it, what kind of supplies they want. They said, stop bringing supplies. Let us buy them ourselves. We know what our soldiers need. We know what our people need. We know what these families need. I mean, that was incredible how quickly Israeli society mobilized with their volunteer efforts. I mean, Matt and I
created apps, because that's very Israeli.
They created apps like right away. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, we just also
and WhatsApp groups, right? And WhatsApp groups too.
And they just figure out a way to move forward. Matt and I were going through El security on our way to Israel, and this Orthodox woman comes up to us, young Orthodox woman, and says, "Hey, you're going to Israel? You're going to be in Tel Aviv. Can you bring this drone battery for me?" I mean, what's the first thing you're asked when you get interviewed by El? Did anyone give you anything that is not yours? And this guy, this El security officer, comes over and goes, "I've told you 10 times. The line to send things and the airplane is over here. Do not ask anyone to bring things for you." They had a separate line they'd set up for people that wanted to send supplies like drone batteries and helmets and all that crap. That ended up, a lot of it went to waste because it wasn't the right materials and needs.
Right. I'll give you another example of how I'm seeing why we need to bring the best of the Israelis and the best of the Americans together. Because yes, the surge has helped, and you use the term Israel has won, Matt, but I think that there's still some challenges out there. I think that we've seen as Hamas has come out of their dungeons. Yeah, I know, I saw you. That the fight that the diaspora Jews are engaged in, fighting anti-Semitism at every level of local government, in the K through 12 schools, what they're teaching these days is horrible, especially in my neck of the woods in Northern California. The Israelis have come out in full force to fight it, right? But they're not always familiar with the right tactics and strategies. So I was at a Palo Alto Unified School District meeting, for example, where they were talking about what should be taught, ethnic studies in the classrooms, and resolutions that should be passed or not passed. That it was all about the moral equivalence. Well, if we're going to condemn anti-Semitism, should we also be condemned, right? And the Israelis, with their passion and their fierceness and the trauma that they're feeling right now, they were yelling at the city council and the school board members. And as an American Jew, again, somebody who's been involved with AIPAC, I'm like, I'm not sure that that's the best tactic.
That's just how Israelis communicate sometimes, unfortunately.
Exactly. I often joke that I'm not fluent in Hebrew, but I'm fluent in Israeli, having married into an Israeli family. I know how to engage that way.
Exactly. Well, we have, in Austin alone, we believe it's ballooned to 1,600 Israeli families here. I mean, thousands of Israelis, and a lot of them live in one particular area or a kind of a couple mile square radius. And they, like some of the Israeli leadership here, are saying you have to do it this way. No one's going to listen to you if you run into the principal's office and just start screaming. they're actually going to probably call the police. Like they're going to ask security to come into the room and take you out. And
Right.
so learning how to navigate this all and working together. I mean, we're sitting in meetings with school districts now where it's someone from the Israeli American Council with us, right? Or a representative from the Israeli community, a professional, with us and the Anti-Defamation League, because there's like 3 or 4, and a rabbi usually from a congregation, because there's 3 or 4, 5 different perspectives as a Jewish community, but we don't want to go in there and look like we're completely, like coming with different opinions. We want to look like we're unified.
Exactly. Now, the challenge is Israelis will see that as us being too weak, Americans being too soft, too complacent, right?
So this
Exactly.
was the crux of my question, right? Which
Yeah.
it was the reverse of that, which is, does Israel look too strong, right, for the American progressive left to get behind, right? They like the underdog, right?
Yep.
Or they like the victimized group. And Israel right now, aside hostages aside, because like that for some reason I can't understand the progressive left doesn't look as at the hostages as victims. I just can't get that in through my head. But Israel doesn't look like the weak victim. They look like, hey, by the way, you guys took out Nasrallah and you've destroyed basically Iran's system and showed that they're a paper tiger, and you bombed the crap out of the Houthis, and look what Gaza looks like, and you're not the underdog, and we can't get on your side. It's actually the reverse of what we just got to, right?
Right. But Matt, even before, when you guys went and visited, when you and Daniel visited, Israel hadn't even gone into Gaza yet. I think they went in the days right around October 27th, right? But
Yeah.
when Israeli women and children were violated, right? When they were raped, when they were tortured, when they were killed, the progressive feminist movement was silent. So even in that moment when they were clearly victims, there was no support from the mainstream or okay. So then it's not just about, well, let's support the underdog, let's just support the victims. It's
I was
about
talking
them
about the
having
progressive
Jewish.
Jews, not the progressive movement. Specifically the progressive Jews who did seem to come out in the surge in favor of Israel and now are walking back that like, well, you know what? Maybe I was right before and I just got a little overzealous there. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Then this is the inherent conflict between the progressive American Jew and the Israeli. The Israeli knows that Israel was founded so that never again will Jews be the victims. And October 7th was a horrific blip on that. And they would rather be seen as the aggressor. They would rather make sure that no Jews are going to die or be tortured or kidnapped ever again, even if it means their reputation is tarnished because they're going out a little too aggressively. Israelis would say, so what? Screw that. I don't care. That's not the reason why Israel exists, so that the Jews can be the underdog and the victim ever again. But you're right. Progressive American Jews have a discomfort with that. This notion of power doesn't sit well with progressive American Jews. So you're right on that,
Well,
Matt.
we actually have a board member who's Israeli, but on the left, right? And she has been going to city council where there's been horrific rhetoric and imagery, and Jews have been spit on who've gone in there in our community. It's terrible. And she's the first to say, it's interesting. She'll say, I completely disagree with how Netanyahu has handled parts of the war. But then she'll get up in front of city council and say, that what we're hearing here is despicable. It is terrible. It's anti-Semitic. It's Jew hatred, whatever word we use today. It's interesting. You can hold both of these truths inside your head, right?
Well,
These
that's
are
the
Israelis
beauty of Israel, right?
Yeah, they're
You could
very
be
critical of the government.
staunchly anti-Netanyahu, right? As many Israelis are, right? And still super pro-Israel, right? Like, and a lot of American progressive Jews, I think, don't realize that there is a progressive Jewish movement in Israel. It's smaller, but they're there, right? I mean, sadly, a lot of them were in the kibbutzim that got attacked by Hamas. But it's not a uniquely American thing. There is a segment of Israeli society that is very progressive. You saw it in the protests before October 7th with judicial reform, right? They were all out in the streets. It's not I know there's more Americans, but it's not a uniquely American thing to be a progressive Jew.
No. You're 100% right. But I would say that progressive American Jews and progressive Israeli Jews are not progressive on the same issues in the same places, right?
Agreed.
We know that. You could be a national security hawk in Israel, but be pro LGBTQ, pro gay marriage, like you could. In America, there's kind of
I'm the
like
only one here in America. I'm like hanging out by myself.
I think for a lot of us American Jews, we feel like we're people without a party. Like I've been a political independent for 25 years now because I don't necessarily fit anywhere. And I think a lot more Jews post October 7th are also finding that they're a little bit lost. They're like, oh, and I'm going to say something that might be sacrilege for Texas, although I know, Austin is a kind of liberal bastion there in Texas. I think there are a lot of American Jews who are liberal who are like, wow, I'm finding myself agreeing with Trump on some of this stuff, the international foreign policy stuff. And they're finding it's like a cognitive dissonance inside themselves because they're like, I don't agree with them on, immigration. I don't agree with on the LGBTQ or trans. I don't agree with it. But like, so a lot of liberal American Jews are at this weird place with our politics.
I think you saw that in the election. I mean, like, I found it very, I was watching the exit polls and all this stuff, right? And just that being a Jew and finding it like just curious to watch how New York plus 15 to Trump versus the last election, right? New Jersey plus 13 to Trump. And this is the Jewish vote, right?
That's right.
Who is moving. And I think you're right, is that so for so long, the Jews and the Democratic Party have been locked like this, and the liberal ideals, right? And now the security issue and anti-Semitism, which, by the way, a lot of people thought was gone, a lot of people thought didn't exist in America, right?
Right.
Is not only there, but like is worse now on the left in a lot of ways than it is on the right. And I don't want to say that right-wing anti-Semitism has gone away, because it clearly has not. But this left-wing anti-Semitism, which you saw in the 60s, right? And then really kind of went away after the McGovern just lost that election by a landslide, right? And now all of a sudden it's here, and people didn't think it existed.
Well, and I think that part of the painful post-October 7th reckoning that we've had to come to ourselves, liberal American Jews, is this sense of abandonment. We feel betrayed by our liberal allies. We were with them when they needed to march for their people's rights, and we were shoulder to shoulder with them. We turned and they had abandoned us when it was their turn to march with us. And that has been really painful.
Yeah, Daniel knows this. I've been very, very critical of the ADL and how they've handled things, because they, got in that was their coalition that they built, right, against hate and everything else like that. And when it was the Jews, that their coalition just was like, well, I don't, well, what, and walked away.
I think it was eye-opening for us. I think that the idea of having coalitions and alliances and having friends to stand with us as we've stood with them is not a bad idea.
It's a great idea.
Right.
So Zach, you want that to go two ways.
And Matt knows this. I've said this on the podcast. I think a mistake that we as American Jews made is that we avoided the Israel issue in these coalitions. We said, we're not going to talk about it. It's too controversial. We can't even talk about it in our own synagogues and our own JCCs. So why would we talk about it with you?
I'll take you even further.
It's a huge mistake.
Not only that, Daniel, I will take you, I will see your bet and I will raise you one. Not only were we tabling the Israel issue in our alliance and coalition spaces, but we were separating the issue in our day schools, in the university classroom. We were teaching Jewish and teaching Israel separately. We were bifurcating the two. So that's why you have these Jewish kids who are very smart, very educated, the if not now kids who are anti-Zionist. Like, it's one thing if you're like, well, our kids are just ignorant and they don't know the truth and they don't know the history. But a lot of these kids are really smart and they know their stuff. How can they Well, it's because we've taught them that Israel is separate from the Jewish. And that's a mistake we're making even in our own mishpacha, Daniel.
Oh, I agree. And I think it's backfired. Austin's no different than anywhere else, for all the coalitions that rabbis that spent decades in this community building fell apart overnight.
Yeah.
October 7th, done. and we have not rebuilt them. I mean, a lot of us feel like an apology is owed to our community before we really re-enter those relationships, if we ever. And I think that I agree with you. Within the Jewish community, in our day schools and BBYO and youth groups, like, this needs to be talked about.
Who's the rabbi in New York that I like so much, Daniel?
You mean which one? Elliot Cosgrove?
No, I do like his book. I'm in the middle of reading it, and he tells a story about his daughter's friend in the book who's like shares a brain with his daughter who has this exact conversation, right? And
yeah,
he admits, he's like, I didn't know what to say.
Yeah,
right?
He said
this is not the Jewish day camp, Jewish school, Jewish all the things, right? Not and as smart as a whip. And he's like, and then the rest of the chapter, I don't want to give it away because I'm hoping to have him on. I really want to ask him about this, but the rest of the chapter is what he would have said to her. But no, that's not the one I'm thinking of. The one that he's got a bunch of stuff on YouTube and on Twitter.
Soloveitchik?
No, I'll remember it later and I'll put it in the show notes. But he's a Reform rabbi who talks about we need to reform the Reform movement.
Amiel Hirsch.
Yes, Amiel Hirsch, right? And he talks about how they've created a whole generation of anti-Zionists by not teaching Israel with being Jewish. They focused on Tikkun Olam, right, which is the buzzword for Judaism of the last 40 years, and not Israel. And it's okay to talk about both, actually. I think you need to talk about both.
Well,
that's right.
I mean, I will say, though, when I was going through rabbinical school, Rabbi David Ellenson, may he rest in peace, was the president of HUC. And my first year of rabbinical school was 2002. So what was going on in 2002 was the height of the Second Intifada. The Hebrew U bombing happened as our school year was starting. Moment Cafe was a few months before that. I lived literally 2 blocks from Moment Cafe in Jerusalem. Like, a lot was impacting the rabbinical school class. And after the Hebrew U bombing, he had to basically acquiesce to the parents who were saying of future rabbinical school students, they're not going to school unless you give an option to do stateside for this first year. And 2/3 of the class went. I went that year, as did the entire education class, the future educators, and part of the cantorial class. But what he said to us when we got there was, I have no better way to teach you Kol Yisrael, a responsibility for the entirety of the Jewish people, a connection to Jewish people, have been to take you out of the United States of America and be in Israel, where you interact with Jews from all around the world. And he said, if I'm going to give smicha, if I'm going to give ordination to the rabbinical school students and cantorial students who are not here, then they're going to have to come fourth year. They're going to have to come fourth year, and they're going to have to do the study in Israel. So there have been great leaders like Rabbi Hirsch in our movement, in my movement, the Reform movement, who have come along and said that Zionism must be part of, like what you're saying, Zach. It has to be taught as part of, like, it's not a side curriculum, right? It's really interwoven inside of what we do, and spending that first year in Israel is critical. The Reform movement purposely sends students to Israel first year versus what the conservative movement actually does. Usually it's around third or fourth year. So they do that because they really want to get people engaged and connected to Israel from the outset.
I love that. And I think it's such a vital part of who we are as a people to connect with Jews in other lands and other countries, especially Israel. And I think what Amiel Hirsch has talked about is that, in the recent years, a lot of these rabbinic students, Daniel, have just come with a bias against Israel. There's nothing that Israel could do that's right in their minds. And there's stories of, not wanting to buy a tallis that was made in Jerusalem, but there's all these stories. And you have to ask yourself the question, how has this happened? What led to that? I believe that when I'm out there in Austin, like you, Matt, I don't want to give away any kind of spoilers, but when I'm going to speak about this at Z3 in Austin.
Wait, you're going to be pro-Israel? Is that a spoiler?
That's a spoiler. Shh, don't tell anyone. I'm going to be talking about the need for our community to have a reckoning. just like the Israelis are looking inward and having a reckoning, how did we fail on October 7th? What led to this massive intelligence military failure? Why did it take 7 hours for the army to show up, right? I think we need to be looking inward and saying, how did the American Jewish community fail over the last 30 years that so many of our kids were underprepared to stand up and be proud Jews after October 7th? Some of them did. Like, they stood up. They were the strong Maccabees on campus. Thank God, my kids are some examples of that. But so many of our kids were unprepared, Matt. I think we need to look inwards with the day schools and the synagogues and the JCCs and the federations and say, what have we done well? But where have we messed up also? And how can we fix that for the future?
I'm assuming your kids have been to Israel.
Yeah, my kids we go every summer. My kids go to Jewish day school. They go to Jewish summer camp, Camp Ramah. They go to Israel every summer. My daughter was on the gap year with Young Judea. She's now a sophomore at Columbia, doing the Columbia JTS program, and is
So that must be
fighting
very
this stuff.
pleasant.
Very pleasant. Exactly. Hillel, Chabad, and she's been canceled by best friends. She can't put a part of her theater group anymore at Columbia. So, but she is strong and standing up. Meanwhile, a lot of her high school friends have canceled her, and you have to ask yourself, what's led to this difference? Where have we gone right? Where have we gone wrong?
Yeah. The reason I asked is my son's been to Israel, and he came back with a totally different perspective. He was already very, pro-Jewish, but once he came back from Israel, he came back with a complete different perspective on what Israel is and why we need to support it.
Talia's going to Israel this summer, and I'm really excited for her to experience it with her peers. She's going on the Israel Leadership Study in Israel, which is, kind of a study track of the BPYO program. So I'm excited for her. So Zach, I know we're getting close on time. You mentioned coming to Austin. What do you hope to accomplish when you come to Austin? We can tell you what we want you to accomplish, but what do you hope to accomplish at this year's Z3 conference in a few weeks?
He wants tacos. He already told me.
No, I want barbecue. I mean, come barbecue. On, man. I'm in California, dude. I could get tacos. I'm in California. I need some Texas barbecue, my friend.
Okay, well, you'll have to come to my non-kosher house to get the really good stuff.
Okay, we won't tell Daniel.
Zach is in Northern California. The real tacos are in Southern California.
Very sad, like San Diego.
I grew up in Southern California. I could vouch for that. You guys are not wrong. And they've migrated up here, and we can get some really good tacos up here. But yes, I'm looking forward to Texas barbecue. I'm looking forward to giving my friend Daniel a hug and saying hi to some new friends. And I'm looking forward to meeting your community that is really struggling in this post-October 7th moment to find a place where they belong, right? A lot of folks have found it. A lot of, as we talked about the surge and people coming out of the woodwork, but there's still a lot of loneliness out there. And I think what you're going to do by hosting this Z3 conference is folks are going to come out who are looking for that hug, either figurative or literal. And they're going to realize, okay, I'm not alone. And not being alone in this moment is so important. And then you're going to give them the tools for how they can fight back in their kids' classroom and in the city councils and the school boards, at their own work places of work, in their own social media feeds. People are looking for support, they're looking for a hug, and they're looking for tools to how to fight back. And I think that's what I'm excited about helping bring to your community that's already been doing this in such a strong way.
We appreciate it, Zach.
We are really looking forward to having you. Guys, links at the bottom of the screen here. If you want to register, you can call Daniel on his cell phone. He'll register for you. We really look forward to having you.
Matt, I'm getting plenty of calls about Z3 already, which you already know about.
Oh, I'm aware. I've been heavily prepped.
Love that.
Michal calls me like 4 times a day, and I'm like, Michal, I have a job. Like, we can talk once a day. Text me in between. But she's Israeli, so she's very persistent.
She doesn't.
Of course.
That's why we love her. There are people, Zach, coming from Houston and Dallas that are sending people there in San Antonio. So we're excited that they're going to be joining us this year. It's going to become more of a regional conference. We'll be your Texas hub.
Excellent. You are the hub, and you are a functional federation, as you know, which allows you to bring the other.
Dysfunctional.
You may have meant that. I didn't mean that, Matt. But don't put words in my mouth. You deep faked my words. This is an opportunity to say to all of the folks who receive Federation funding, come and be a part of us. So last year you had, Hillel from UT, and you had BBYO folks, and you had ADL and AJC. And I love that because it's a true community conversation, as well as all the people who are unaffiliated, right? We can't just fall on the alphabet soup of the folks involved with community organizations. I love that you have Matt as the other guy who's here, who doesn't wear a professional Jew hat, who's engaged in this conversation in a real way. And I'm looking forward to those conversations with folks in your community as well.
All right.
Thank you,
Well,
Zach,
Zach, we can't wait to
appreciate it.
have you. Thanks for your time on the podcast. Everybody, thank you for listening. We will see you next week back here on The Rabbi and the Other Guy. And Zach, if you want to talk about barbecue, we can do that offline. I'll make sure you get some good stuff.
Perfect. I'll hold you to it. Thank you guys for having me. Looking forward to seeing you
Zach.
next.
Thank you, Zach.
You got it.
Bye, guys.
Appreciate it.